These are 5 of the scariest alien stories ever told on the Joe Rogan Experience Podcast. On the Joe Rogan Experience number 1574, featuring James Fox tells a story about how some children in Zimbabwe encountered a UFO. Now, James Fox is a documentary filmmaker known for his in-depth explorations of UFO phenomena. James Fox literally dedicated much of his career to investigating and documenting UFOs and alleged alien encounters. Now, back in 1997, James Fox was working on his first documentary, and he had a friend who was also a friend of Steven Spielberg's. Now, James thought that maybe he could get an interview with Steven Spielberg for his documentary, so he asked his friend to ask Steven Spielberg for an interview, and while Steven Spielberg declined the interview, he told James Fox that he should look into a certain UFO encounter at a school in Africa. Now, when James Fox did some research on this particular UFO encounter in Africa, he immediately dismissed it. Fast forward about 10 years later, James Fox met a guy who was working on a documentary on the UFO encounter at a school in Africa, so James Fox decided to work with that guy on that documentary after dismissing the encounter in the first place. Take a listen.
There were roughly 100 kids in the playground, broad daylight, aerial school, Roswell, Zimbabwe, 1994, and they got within some of them within arm's length of these beings, and brought these witnesses together for the first time in 20 years. And a lot of them hadn't even told their significant others, just because they said they were tired of having to defend this. And I myself didn't believe it when I first heard about it back in 1997. And that segment of the film is the most, in my opinion, is the most powerful segment, because
it's very compelling.
You've got all these children saying what they saw on camera after it happened, and then you see them 20 years later, and then we go to Africa and we meet with the headmistress. She was a teacher at the time. We meet with other witnesses. We go to the landing site. We talk to people at the school. That case is absolutely, and it was witnessed by lots of other people in and around the area for several days before it chose a school to land.
It's so compelling because the children are all clearly, they're not actors. So as they're adults later, they're all talking about this moment, and it's like they had a religious experience together. Like they're all sharing it and talking about it, and you could tell it's like it's a deeply moving experience. If they were actors, they wouldn't have been able to do such a good job, because to convey the reality of that moment to them, to be able to have this interpretation of this event where they're all consistent in the story and they're all clearly still shook by this moment. It's really interesting, because if you had that scene in a movie, it would take like a really good actor to pull it off, and they'd probably need multiple takes. They'd probably want to get the best one. But those kids, the way they were talking about it and the way they were drawing it, you're like, wow, it really does seem like something happened to them.
Now, just for all of you who don't know the full story of the aerial school UFO incident, basically on the morning of September 16th, 1994, at the aerial school in Roswell, Zimbabwe, 62 students, yes, 62 students aged between 6 and 12 years old reported witnessing a strange aerial phenomenon and encountered beings of unknown origins. So at approximately 10 a.m., while the teachers were inside for a meeting, the children were playing outside when they observed one or more silver disc-shaped objects descending from the sky. These objects reportedly landed or hovered just beyond the schoolyard in a field of brush and small trees. According to the children's accounts, several beings emerged from the craft. Descriptions of these entities were remarkably consistent. They were short, they had large heads, and they possessed large oval-shaped black eyes. They wore tight-fitting, shiny black clothing. Some children noted that the beings seemed to, glide or hover rather than walk. The encounter lasted approximately 15 minutes. Some children fled in fear, while others remained and observed the beings. Several students reported that the beings communicated with them telepathically, conveying messages about environmental degradation and the potential consequences of humanity's technology technological advancements. The incident quickly garnered attention. Local UFO researcher Cynthia Hind visited the school shortly after the event, interviewing the children and collecting drawings of what they had seen. BBC correspondent Tim Leach also conducted interviews, expressing his astonishment at the consistency and sincerity of the children's testimonies. In November of 1994, Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack traveled to Zimbabwe to conduct a more in-depth investigation. Mack, known for his work on alien abduction phenomena, interviewed many of the children individually. He conducted that the children were not fabricating their stories and were genuinely affected by the experience.
If a UFO or several UFOs landed at a school in broad daylight in Rua, Zimbabwe, Africa, and interacted telepathically with nearly 100 school children, not all of them had telepathic, but seen the incident. How significant of a story would you give that?
Well, not only that, they had the same message.
Yes.
What the telepathic message was that technology is a real problem.
Yes.
And there's things that people are doing with technology that are going to ruin the earth.
Yes.
And they were trying to relay this to children, which is very strange.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I mean, maybe they just thought they were adults because they were the same size as the aliens. I mean, do you think they knew that they were children? Do you think they understood that it was a school? I mean, this is all speculation, right?
But no, I definitely had to ask myself, look, during the production of the film, Paula Harris actually turned me on to another landing case that happened in Australia in 1966 at a school. And this time there were roughly 300 witnesses that saw a disc land right outside a playground in Australia. And we went to Australia and investigated that case, went to the landing site, talked to eyewitness testimony, people that jumped the fence at the school playground and ran over to where this thing landed. And then we even interviewed a guy who snapped a photograph of a disc, a Polaroid, back in 1966, 2 days prior to the incident. So it's very probably that we have photographic evidence, we have eyewitness testimony, and for the first time we've got testimony from a science teacher. So why do these things land at schools? It seems like, and I'm just totally speculating here, but it seems like if I were going to do that, it seems like a pretty benign environment. When you have testimony from military guys that we take a fairly hostile position towards things that penetrate sensitive military installations, and so maybe, I'm just saying, maybe
It's safe.
Yeah, maybe it's safe.
James Fox also talks about a similar sighting in Australia. And again, for those of you who don't know, he is referencing the Westall UFO incident on April 6, 1966. Now, on that day in the Melbourne suburb of Clayton South, approximately 200 students and staff from Westall High School reported witnessing a mysterious flying object. Witnesses described seeing a silver or gray disc-shaped object with a dome top hovering over the school grounds. The object was observed descending behind a row of trees into an area known as the Grange, which was a nearby open field. Some accounts mentioned the presence of 5 light aircraft seemingly tracking or shadowing the object. Students and staff reported that the object either landed or hovered just above the ground in the Grange. Several students who ventured into the area found a circular patch of flattened grass, suggesting a landing site. The object then reportedly ascended rapidly and vanished from sight. In the wake of the sighting, the school's headmaster conveyed a special assembly instructing students and staff that they had not seen a flying saucer and were not to discuss the incident. Some witnesses recalled being warned by men in uniforms to remain silent, and there were reports of officials cordoning off the landing site and removing soil samples. Now, on the Joe Rogan Experience number 1976, James Fox also tells a different alien story, this time about Brazil's Roswell. Brazil's Roswell started on January 13th, 1996. From January 13th, 1996 to January 20th, 1996, numerous residents of Varginha, Brazil began reporting sightings of unusual flying objects. Now, these objects were described as cigar-shaped or disc-shaped aircraft They were hovering silently or moving erratically, and some even reported the object trailing smoke or, flying low. The most sensational part about this case came on January 20th, 1996, when 3 young women, Lillian Silva, Valkyria Silva, and Katia Xavier, reportedly encountered a strange being in a vacant lot. These 3 women saw a creature that was about 4 to 5 feet tall with brownish oily skin, big red eyes, and a large head with veins or ridges protruding. They observed that the creature seemed weak, injured, or even disoriented, and it gave off a strong smell like ammonia or sulfur. Now, the girls were terrified and ran home to tell their mother, who reportedly returned to the area and found only a strong lingering odor. Now, shortly after the sighting, firefighters and military trucks were seen in the neighborhood, especially near the lot. There were reports that the Brazilian military captured the creature and transported it to ESA, which was a nearby military facility. Now, allegedly, the creature was then taken to Hospital Regional de Varginha and possibly transferred again to other facilities. There were even rumors of a second creature being found and one dying, which allegedly led to a Brazilian military officer's death due to an infection after handling the being. Now, some hospital workers claimed that a strange creature was brought in under heavy secrecy. Staff were allegedly removed from wings of the hospital, and a military presence was reported. Now, it seems like the military tried to cover this whole situation up because civilians claimed to see military roadblocks and, flatbed trucks transporting large crates. Brazilian authorities gave conflicting reports, first denying everything and then suggesting that the girls actually just saw a homeless mentally ill man, and some believe the US or the CIA or even NASA was involved, having allegedly pressured Brazil to keep the incident quiet. Now, James Fox was working on a documentary about Brazil's Roswell and even interviewed the 3 girls who saw the strange being. Take a listen.
I asked Katya and I asked all the girls, during that moment of contact, when you lock eyes, I know it's only a brief second, but during that moment of contact, what did you feel? Like, put me there. That's where the title comes from, Moment of Contact, because that was when they locked eyes on this creature. And that's when Katya said, help me, I'm scared. And it was feeble and suffering. And it's a very powerful moment. And these girls have been saying the same thing. The mother, it's the first time I'd ever reported on these so-called men in dark suits that show up and intimidate witnesses. Honestly, I've been hearing about those cases for so many times, but I've avoided them because it's got so much baggage from men in black. It's just ridiculous. I just didn't even want to be associated with it. But I'd heard it. I can go on until I'm blue in the face. I go till tomorrow morning with the amount of cases, with generals too. But this time, when the mother said that these men showed up and tried to get the daughters to say they were lying and offered her a briefcase full of $100 bills and they could relocate, I don't know, for some reason I said, okay, for the first time in 25 years, I'm going to report on these guys. And I did. And it's in the movie. You can hear the mother talking about it, and she's so emotional. And the mother came back to the location right after it happened, the smell, that stench, and the footprint on the ground. I mean, everybody talks about that stench, that it was so... They said, if you ever take like a skunk, multiply that by like 100,000, that would give you some indication of the level of how putrid and nasty. It was paralyzing. And it stayed in the areas, like at the hospitals when they did the x-rays, and everybody talks about it. That stench, it was unbelievable. Like, it fills your navel cavities and doesn't leave for a week. It was incredible. And then they all said the same thing.
And they couldn't get it out.
They couldn't get it out. Yeah, they sanitized the hospital. The guy said that he had to close off that wing of the hospital while they were sanitizing it because it was so intense.
James Fox briefly mentions how men in black suits visited the Silva family home and told them to keep quiet, and I just want to quickly expand on that. Now, according to Vittorio Paccassini, who was one of the original Brazilian ufologists who investigated the case, shortly after the girls' sighting on January 20th, 1996, 2 men in suits arrived at the Silva family home. These men were described as, wearing dark formal clothing, sometimes described as black suits, speaking in a calm, almost rehearsed tone, and they did not appear to be from the local area. They allegedly warned the family not to talk to anyone about what the girls saw. Now, it's said that the nature of the warning was reportedly subtle but firm. There was no explicit threats, but the implication was clear. basically keep quiet. The girls' mother, Luisa Silva, confirmed in interviews that strange men came to her house. And while she didn't label them as men in black, she did say they arrived unexpectedly and asked probing questions. She believed they might be government or military officials. Now, they offered no credentials and left after a short conversation. Now, this is important because Brazilian authorities tried to dismiss the whole UFO and alien encounter in Virginia with so many different stories. You know, first off, the girls didn't see an alien. They actually just saw a mentally ill homeless man. You know, that's what the Brazilian authorities first said. Then they said it was the military's routine activity and that all of the military trucks and soldiers were conducting training exercises. There were just so many different stories from Brazilian authorities to try and cover this up. And if there were actually men in black who showed up at the Silva family home, I personally think that it is very strong evidence showing that the girls actually saw an alien. Because if the girls actually just saw a homeless man, then why the need for the men in black to warn them not to talk about, you know, what they saw?
The military officer, the guy that drove the creature around, I was sitting across from him. You can't see his face, but I did. And I'm looking this guy in the eyes. I'm thinking, I could be looking at a guy that drove a alien around. You have no idea, dude. You have no idea.
How did he describe it?
So nuts. When I came back from that trip, people were like, how was your trip to Brazil? What was it like, man? They got great, smoothies and coffee. And I'm just like, you guys have no idea. I think an alien spaceship crashed and they recover live aliens. And we made contact and the Americans came in. That's what I'm thinking about. So I told a couple people. On the last trip I came back, I was just like, I was so rocked. I couldn't reintegrate back into culture. I was just like, I think this happened. It's the biggest story ever. So people were asking me, even my neighbor who runs that Make-A-Wish Foundation, he was like, James, he goes, bro, I like you a lot and I got a lot of respect for you, but you lost me on this one. And I was like, I don't blame you, bro. I really don't. But listen to the witnesses. That's all I say. And I would tell people, and I realized I can't talk about it. All I can say is just listen to the witnesses. Don't take it from me. But I'm looking at that guy in the eyes, Joe. And I've been at this for 30 years. I'm working on my 7th film right now. I'm looking this guy in the eyes and I'm like, this guy probably drove an alien around. And it tripped me out so hard. And it ruined his life. He's to get this guy to go on camera, just like a week earlier, he was like, I don't care all the money in the world. I'm never coming forward. The risks are too high.
How did it ruin his life?
Because you're harboring this secret. You're being watched. You're being told not to ever talk about this. And you're looking over your shoulder all the time. And they call you, the military calls you periodically. They want to know where you are. And he's got this secret inside him that he can't tell the rest of the world. And he's thinking about all the different, everyone's out there speculating, is it real, is it fake, is it real, is it fake? And this guy drove a body around. Just think about that for a second. Think about the doctor who took the x-rays of this thing.
Now, earlier I mentioned how there was a Brazilian officer who actually died a few weeks after allegedly coming into contact with the alleged alien. And again, I just kind of want to quickly expand on this because James Fox mentions how the guy who drove the alien body around and the doctor who autopsied the alien practically got their lives ruined because of this event. So Marco was a 23-year-old active duty officer at the time of Brazil's Roswell. Now, by all accounts, Marco was a healthy young officer with no known medical conditions prior to his sudden illness and death. Now, on January 20th, 1996, Marco was part of a police patrol team that responded to unusual reports in Brazil. He and 2 other officers were ordered to intercept or investigate a strange creature that had been spotted by civilians. Witnesses say that they saw a creature captured by military or police personnel, which was later loaded into a box or a cage and transported away. Now, Marco allegedly made physical contact with the being, possibly handling it without proper protection. Now, shortly after this alleged contact, some reports say that days later, and others say a few weeks, that Marco began feeling very ill. He had a high fever, extreme fatigue, progressive immune system collapse, and dark purple blotches on his skin, which was described by multiple family members. He was hospitalized, but doctors could not diagnose the illness, and his condition rapidly deteriorated. He died on February 15th, 1996, which is less than a month after the supposed incident. Authorities claimed that Marco died of an infection called sepsis, or generalized infection, but no detailed medical records were made available to the family. His autopsy report was classified. Family members say the doctors told them off the record that his immune system had just simply shut down, but they couldn't explain why. Now, Marco's mother spoke out in interviews and documentaries, insisting that, and I quote, "My son died because of what he touched that day. I know it, and they told me to stay quiet." She also said she was pressured by authorities not to talk to the press and was warned to stop asking questions. In multiple interviews, family members stated Marco was not himself after the event. He seemed emotionally disturbed, possibly afraid, but couldn't talk about what had happened. Now, the military allegedly visited the family after his death and discouraged them from making statements. Now, I don't know about you guys, but with all of the facts and the eyewitness accounts and stories from Brazil's Roswell, I can almost confidently say that I believe that this happened and that a UFO actually landed in Virginia and those 3 girls actually saw an alien. But of course, what do you guys think? On the Joe Rogan Experience number 1597, featuring Travis Walton, Travis talks to Joe about his alien abduction. Now, if you were not aware, the Travis Walton alien abduction is one of the most detailed, controversial, and widely discussed UFO cases ever. It's still considered by many to be the most credible alien abduction story because it involved multiple witnesses, an official missing persons case, and polygraph tests. So the story goes, on November 5th, 1975, Travis Walton was part of a 7-man logging crew hired by the U.S. Forest Service to clear trees in a remote part of the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona. At around 6 p.m., after a full day of work, the crew was heading back to town in a truck. Now, as they drove through a remote area, they noticed an unusual glow through the trees. They came around a bend and stopped when they saw something hovering 20 feet above a clearing. A metallic, disc-shaped craft around 15 to 20 feet in diameter, glowing with a golden light and making a strange, high-pitched humming sound. Travis jumped out of the truck to get a closer look against the other guys' warnings, and as he walked beneath it, a bluish-green beam of light shot down and hit him in the chest, lifting him off the ground. He was thrown backward like a rag doll, violently slammed to the ground and motionless. The crew panicked. Thinking he was, dead or being abducted, they sped away in the truck. After driving several miles, the crew stopped, argued, and then decided to go back for Travis. But when they returned, he was gone. No trace, no body, no scorch marks, just completely gone. That night, they went to the police in Snowflake and reported what happened. Officers were skeptical, thinking maybe it was a cover-up for murder or an accident. Now, the next day, a massive search operation began. There were helicopters, police dogs, volunteers, and tracking teams. But for 5 days, there was no sign of Travis Walton. Now, on the night of November 10th, Travis Walton called his brother from a payphone in Heber, Arizona, about 30 miles away from where he vanished. When his family picked him up, he was disoriented, extremely thin and weak, terrified, and unable to explain where he had been. And that's at least not at first. After Travis calmed down and began piecing his memories back together, his story unfolded like something out of a sci-fi film. He awoke inside of a room, laying on a table with a bright light shining above him. His body was in pain and he thought that he was in a hospital. As his vision cleared, he realized the figures around him weren't human. He described 3 beings about 4 to 5 feet tall, large bald heads, huge brown eyes, wearing orangish brown suits and pale grayish skin. They didn't speak, They just stared at him. Now, panicked, he jumped off the table and began throwing things at the beings. He found a clear tube-like object nearby and threw it at them. They backed off and left the room, and he ran down a hallway trying to find a way out, and then he entered a different room. Now, in this room, he met a tall, human-looking man with golden hair wearing a helmet. This being also didn't speak to him, but gestured for Travis to follow him. Travis was led into another room where he saw 2 more humanoid beings, one male and one female, both strikingly beautiful and eerily calm. They gently pushed him down onto another table and placed a mask over his face. And then Travis Walton blacked out, and the next thing he remembered was standing on the side of the road, watching the craft fly away silently into the night. Now, shockingly, all 6 other crew members took polygraph tests administered by the Arizona Department of Public Safety. 5 passed, 1 was inconclusive due to nervousness, and none of them found to be lying. They never changed their story, even decades later. Travis took multiple lie detector tests. Most showed no deception, and he also passed psychological evaluations with no evidence of delusions or mental illness. Now, while sitting down with Joe Rogan, Joe asks Travis about what he remembers right after being abducted by the aliens. Take a listen.
My consciousness was kind of like in and out for a while. I didn't know where I was. The pain and the feeling that I was mortally wounded, something was so wrong inside. I felt like I was dying. And this is what really fueled the panic when I finally laid eyes on these creatures. Of course, all of the mental programming that we get from Hollywood that aliens are invading monsters, didn't help. But I instantly associated this feeling of dying with pain with them. So I was combative immediately. I was lying on my back on a raised table. There was a light above me. It was not real bright. It was not so bright that I couldn't, see the outline of the fixture. But
what did the fixture look like?
Kind of like that, only much larger. Just a soft glow. And in the movie, there's a little bit of striking on the part of the aliens against me. That didn't happen. I lashed out at them. The one closest to me, I felt really weak. I didn't have enough strength to do much. So when my arm contacted him, he just fell back very unexpectedly easy into the other one. And I rolled off the table in the other direction. They came around the table, and the 3 of them were coming towards me. And I just grabbed something from behind me, an object off of the shelf there, and started swinging it at them.
What was the object?
It was just some large, long cylinder or rod, glass, some clear material. I wasn't studying it. I was looking at them and swinging wildly, screaming threats. They stopped, and I was planning on attacking more fully, just making way past them. The only doorway I could see was on the other side of them.
And it looked like a doorway?
Yeah, it looked like a doorway. Just, I guess it's a pretty typical description nowadays. Very large eyes, hairless, 2 eyes, nose, mouth. I didn't see them speak or no change in the expressions. To me, that in the face of all the screaming and the fear that I was projecting, their lack of reaction probably just added to my panic. But
did they feel like they were a living creature, or did they feel like they were a robot?
Well, they were without expression, I'll say that. But, I've had 45 years to think about that. In more recent years, I think, well, maybe if they're telepathic and it's developed enough to where they don't need to talk, they also don't need facial expression.
Right.
And so their ability to communicate with each other would be much richer and more complete than we have. And speech and frowns or smiles or whatever would become obsolete pretty quick.
Yeah.
Travis Walton describes these aliens as having small mouths and big eyes, and that they did not communicate with him directly or didn't communicate verbally at all, suggesting that aliens do communicate telepathically. Then Travis Walton talks about how they had no facial expressions and says that after 45 years of looking back on his abduction, he came to the conclusion that since they are telepathic, there is no need for facial expressions. Now, facial expressions in humans evolved to help convey emotion and intent non-verbally, but if telepathy already transmits thoughts, feelings, or images instantly, expressions might be useless. And that's why people who have allegedly seen aliens have described them as emotionless or, having just a blank face. Just thinking about all of this, I have a quick little theory, and trust me, you guys are probably going to think I'm crazy, but I'm just throwing this out there. What if aliens are humans, but from like thousands of years in the future? I mean, when we think of aliens, we think of these super advanced beings that can travel through space and time, but what if one day we will all be aliens? Like, obviously not me and you, like we will honestly probably be long gone by then, but that could be what the human race is heading towards. I mean, think about it. If aliens don't have a need for facial expressions or to communicate verbally, it could hint why they have such small mouths. Again, that's assuming that aliens have small mouths and big eyes. Maybe over thousands of years, human mouths got smaller and smaller because, there is really no need for them anymore except to eat. But then again, has anyone ever testified to seeing an alien eat? Yeah, I know, it's just a pretty out there theory, but all I could think about when hearing about the description of their mouths was just like, shit. The aliens could be humans that just adapted and evolved over thousands or millions of years. On the Joe Rogan Experience number 2264, featuring Jason Sands and Lenval Logan, Joe Rogan shares his experience visiting Skinwalker Ranch. Skinwalker Ranch, located in northeastern Utah's remote Uintah Basin, has become one of the most well-known paranormal hotspots in the United States. Covering over 500 acres, the ranch has gained a reputation for hosting decades of bizarre, often terrifying phenomena, ranging from UFO sightings and cattle mutilations to strange creatures and unexplained electromagnetic anomalies. Now, the name Skinwalker is rooted in Native American legend, particularly from the Navajo tribe. Now, according to their lore, a Skinwalker is a malevolent witch capable of transforming into animals or taking over human bodies. Now, while the ranch itself lies within Ute tribal territory, the Ute people also acknowledge the presence of dark forces in the area and believe that the land is cursed, a belief that has persisted for generations. Now, the modern mystery of Skinwalker Ranch began in 1994 when Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased the property. The family reported immediate and increasingly disturbing experiences. They claimed to see mysterious lights in the sky, heard disembodied voices, and witnessed the appearance of massive, seemingly bulletproof wolves. Now, even more disturbing were the frequent and gruesome cattle mutilations. Animals found dead with organs removed and no trace of blood or predators. After just 2 years, overwhelmed and frightened, the Shermans sold the ranch to billionaire Robert Bigelow, founder of the National Institute for Discovery Science. Bigelow brought a team of scientists and researchers to study the anomalies scientifically, and although they witnessed strange activity, including glowing orbs and electromagnetic disruptions, no conclusive explanation was ever found. Much of the data collected during this time still remains classified or unpublished. In 2016, the ranch was purchased by real estate investor Brandon Fugel, who launched a new phase of public interest through the History Channel docuseries The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. The show documents ongoing investigations into high radiation levels, unexplained aerial phenomena, and technological malfunctions. Researchers have even reported health issues after being exposed to certain areas of the ranch, including nausea, headaches, and sudden memory loss. Now, here is Joe Rogan's experience at Skinwalker Ranch. Take a listen.
Well, I was doing it for a television show, and we interviewed a bunch of people that lived there. And one guy, there was a lot of people that they wanted to be interviewed, and then when we got there, they chickened out. It seemed like there might be some drug use going on in the surrounding areas. A few people seemed like a little on tilt, but I think that's a good part of America. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people. You could find some packets of people in America that are just doing drugs. So I wouldn't say that was what it was, but this one guy that I talked to didn't seem like that at all. He seemed very respectable. I don't remember what he did, but he was a very smart guy, blue-collar guy, and lived in this very modest house, and he had this story of this thing that flew into his yard and through his house. And he said it was a small orb, and he said it seemed to be communicating with him. And
wow,
this guy didn't have any other bullshit stories. He didn't have any claims of just this one experience that he said was beautiful. He said it was incredible that this thing seemed like it was alive. It seemed like it was communicating with him, and it went right through the walls, and then it went through the wall again and disappeared.
I've had a similar case. So every March I go to Seaside, Oregon, because they have a paranormal conference, and when I was there, I was talking about my app and all this other stuff, and these two Asian ladies were watching me walk on the stage, and I was like, why are they looking at me like that? And I was like, is my flies down or something? What did I do, And as soon as I stepped off the stage, they said, Mr. Logan, what are they? And I was like, what do you mean? She pulls out on her phone the most beautiful, pristine picture of an orb sitting in a doorway. And I'm like, what happened there? And she said, it was my birthday. And she said, all my family was there. And she said, but I got tired, so I was laying down. And she said, I heard like this electrical discharge going on. And she said, it came right through her wall, started floating across her room. She said, it got to her doorway. She screamed, and all her family came. And the son, I guess it was, took the picture of the orb. And I was so amazed by her story, I even forgot to ask her to give me a copy of the picture.
How long ago was this?
This was like 2 years ago.
So fairly modern phone.
Yeah, it was an iPhone. She was. They were from Northern California, and they drove up to this thing, and I'm just like, so what happened? She said it actually sat there and did this like a heartbeat, getting bigger and smaller. But it sounded just like your story of what happened to this other.
Yeah, he was the only guy that was compelling. There was a bunch of other people that had goofy stories of bulletproof wolves that appeared out of the mist, and okay. They just seemed like some people just wanted to be on TV.
Joe and Lenval Logan described these two cases where people have experienced orbs that have, flown through their walls. Now, there could be a few explanations for these orbs. Now, first, in ufology, orbs are sometimes thought to be a form of surveillance drone, probe, or even a non-physical manifestation of an alien presence. Now, some believe that these orbs are beings or tech from another dimension capable of bypassing physical matter like walls. But in paranormal circles, orbs are, often linked with ghosts, spirits, or energy manifestation. Hence why in a lot of paranormal caught on camera videos, orbs are usually seen. But let's also step away from the paranormal or extraterrestrial explanations. Now, people seeing orbs could be some type of hallucination. These hallucinations could occur during the transition between, wakefulness and sleep. People may see lights, feel a presence, or witness orbs that seem very real. Now, that could explain why people see orbs. It's just a hallucination. But that doesn't explain why people have caught these orbs on camera, or in Lenval Logan's case, the woman had a photo of this orb in her house. Now, she obviously wasn't hallucinating because there is evidence of this orb. Now, another explanation of these orbs could be that, they are astral beings or guides. In New Age or esoteric circles, orbs are often interpreted as spirits, angels, or energy beings that are visible due to heightened perception. But in my personal opinion, I think that a lot of people that claim to see orbs on things like, Ring cameras or whatever are just picking up some type of dust, or maybe even just like a bug that they were mistaking for a paranormal orb. But in other cases, I have also seen some videos of orbs on Ring cameras that are so unusual that I think the only explanation is that they are some type of spirit or extraterrestrial phenomenon. But as always, what do you guys think is the most rational explanation for these orbs? On the Joe Rogan Experience number 1883, guest Ryan Graves shares his crazy UFO encounter with Joe Rogan. Ryan Graves has a degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering, and after he graduated college, he went and flew F-18s for the Navy. He flew the F-18s operationally and in combat before becoming an instructor and teaching new pilots pilots how to fly F-18s. Now, Ryan Graves claims that him and the other people that he was in the air with witnessed UFOs on several different counts when they were just doing their normal flying. Take a listen.
For me personally, the experience was simply just flying out to the area like I would any other day. And instead of seeing an empty airspace with just my wing person or another squadron doing something in a different block, there were all of a sudden a lot of different radar contacts, which is immediately a problem because, you know, we could be hitting one of those or someone working in our area. And this was happening because we upgraded our radar the best we could tell. Generally speaking, we would expect to see, you know, more objects if there were any out there or smaller objects, but there shouldn't have been any objects out there. Our working areas start about 10 miles off the coast, and then it goes out, you know, 100 or 250 miles or so, though we don't usually use those far eastern areas. But we would only see them over the water. So they would really only be in our working areas, maybe slightly, you know, in between the working areas and land, but never over the land. Sometimes over the bays that are in the area that are quite large, but never just kind of zooming west over land or anything like that.
Now, Joe Rogan asks Ryan Graves if where they were flying, you know, where they were allegedly seeing these UFOs was restricted airspace. Now, this is an important question because if where they were flying wasn't restricted airspace, those objects that they were seeing on their upgraded radar systems could have just been other aircrafts. Now, Ryan Graves explains that where they fly isn't technically restricted airspace, meaning that at times other aircrafts could enter the airspace briefly, but Ryan says that when that happens, those aircrafts get called out immediately. But also, speaking much broader, the Air Defense Identification Zone in North America, which is practically just an area around North America where the United States and Canada can basically, you know, track all of the aircrafts that are coming towards their airspace. Now, any aircraft entering that zone must tell air traffic control in advance, or they get deemed a threat. And as Ryan said before, mainly where they saw these aircrafts on the radars were off the coast. So no, it technically isn't restricted airspace, but if it was just another aircraft, you know, up there with them, that it would have been identified before it even hit their radar.
You know, we would typically see an aircraft just kind of trudging along with a straight line, taking occasional turns. But these objects had a little bit more of a, I don't want to say random, but more less controlled flight path. That velocity vector would kind of jump around a bit more. They would not proceed in like a perfectly straight line as you would imagine like a flight navigation computer would take you, right? It takes you from A to B in the straightest line possible. These objects seem to kind of be moving in a direction that was not a straight line, but generally proceeding in that direction. And so they would kind of be meandering slightly, but moving in that general direction, both three-dimensionally and horizontally. So
winding around, going up, going down. Mm-hmm. So they're not on a flat plane, and they're not going in a straight line.
So I don't want to draw too many firm statements like that because we would see them being flat, too. We'd see them perfectly stationary up there, regardless of the wind.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. So what kind of wind are you talking about?
Oh, gosh. I mean, at altitude, you can have anywhere up to 100, 120 knots of airspeed.
What is that in miles per hour?
It's about 100, 130, 140 miles an hour.
So they're completely stationary with 140 mile an hour wind.
Correct.
Now, you may be asking yourself, how does an object stay perfectly stationary at altitude with over 100 mile per hour winds hitting it? Well, that's honestly a great question. Ryan Graves even says that is the part that he doesn't quite understand. He explains that if you imagine a sphere surrounded by a bunch of rockets and you wanted to keep that sphere completely stationary against gravity, you could just fire all of the rockets, you know, at the bottom really fast and have those rockets fight against gravity, leaving the sphere stationary. But there would still be little variations, especially with wind hitting it. It's very difficult to get an object to stay completely still with 100 mile per hour winds hitting it, especially since the direction of the wind varies as well. But Ryan explains that these UFOs didn't even seem like they were fighting against the wind. It was almost as if they were just there. Now, Joe Rogan asks Ryan what was going through his mind the first time he saw one of these UFOs.
Yeah, the first time really was, well, you know, what is this, right? It's not a UFO or something mysterious at this point. It's at what we're thinking at this point we see on the radar is just well, our radar is broken, right? These perhaps don't represent physical objects yet because we hadn't, visually seen these or seen them on our camera yet. And so, we kind of like, hey, what's going on here? Is anyone else seeing this kind of thing? But not really like investigating it, right? It's just kind of like, all right, there was stuff out there, but maybe next time we'll take a look. But the way our systems work, when we have all these contacts on our radar, and if we kind of just select one out with our little cursor there, all our sensors go to it. Our FLIR goes to it, which is our camera system. All our weapons, they have like their own little eyes in some sense, and they all look in that direction. And so eventually, someone had one of these selected and flew close enough so that as they look at their FLIR system, their camera, they could see something that was at the spot represented on the radar, right? So there was something there.
So they were seeing it visually with their own eyes?
Not at this point, just on the FLIR system.
The FLIR system.
And so it's a regular camera and also an infrared camera. And so typically we'll roll around in infrared just because it returns a better image. Typically. So
now on the cameras that the pilots were looking at, that were pointing at this thing that they were seeing on their radar, it didn't necessarily look like an object. Ryan describes it as a light of energy, as if someone was pointing a flashlight at the camera. But obviously there was something in the sky with them that was reflecting that light onto their camera. So at that moment, Ryan knew it wasn't an error in the radar. They were, thinking it could be some type of object like a mylar balloon or maybe even tin foil, which obviously anything in the sky near those planes could be very dangerous. If it was a mylar balloon and it went into one of the plane's engines, it would take down the aircraft. Now, Joe then asks Ryan how fast this object was moving, in which return Ryan says that this object that they were detecting could be stationary at times, and then at other times it would be flying at around the speed of 270 to 370 miles per hour.
Yeah, a fighter aircraft would be kind of flying around at those airspeeds, except sometimes they would be perfectly stationary as well.
Right. So it's not exhibiting any sort of patterns that you've recognized in the past?
No, they have actually. So, although
but with the stationary, no, right?
Correct. With the stationary, no. With the meandering kind of flight path, no. But I would also see them essentially fly what we call a racetrack pattern. And essentially what that means is they fly in a straight path, and then they do like a 180-degree turn in a certain direction, then they fly a straight path, then turn again. So that's what we call a racetrack pattern as opposed to a circular holding pattern. We did witness racetrack patterns. In fact, I think there's been some cases off the West Coast just past couple weeks where people have also been observing objects flying in racetrack patterns high at altitude with lights. So I do recognize that behavior, but I don't necessarily think that means we have to attribute it to normal behavior necessarily. That type of flight path is important because it's a very efficient way to fly, right? If you have to maintain the position in a certain area, you want to minimize how much you're turning. Because anytime you're turning in an aircraft, you're using more energy than if you were just flying straight and level. And so by having a racetrack pattern, it's an efficient way of holding in a position by maximizing straight and level time and minimizing your turn time.
And how long would these things stay up there for?
So from our experience, and again, we weren't studying these, but they were always out there. They were
always
out there when we took off, we'd see them, and then we go to land, they would still be out there.
Like every day?
Every day.
Every day?
Every day.
So you guys go from not having any idea that these things are out there to an upgraded radar system to seeing them every day.
Yep.
So first they are, flying with this upgraded radar system and all of a sudden seeing these really foreign objects on their radars. At first they think it's just an error in the radar and it's picking up something that's not there. But then they see these things every single day. They've used their cameras and only really have seen something that looks like a mylar balloon or tin foil that's reflecting light. Now it was always in the back of Ryan's head, like, what is this thing that we are coming into contact with? But it wasn't until they actually saw this object with their own eyes that really made them question what was in the air with them.
There were two aircraft from my squadron, VFA 11, and they flew, took off as a flight of two. That means they're essentially flying in a formation like this. And as they hit the area, one of these objects went right between the aircraft. The lead air crew saw the object. The Dash 2 aircraft crew did not, which is not surprising because they're usually, you're very focused on flying formation. You're just staring right at that aircraft. The lead really has actual leeway to look around. So he saw it, and, he immediately came back. I have to assume he didn't have it on his radar because he wouldn't have flown through this object at the entrance point. He turned around, flew back, landed, and I was in the ready room when he come back, and he had all his gear on, which typically is not a good thing because you want to get that stuff off as fast as possible. So usually means there's a problem of some nature, and he was just sitting there saying, "Hey, I almost hit one of those damn things." And we all knew what he was referring to, even though we didn't necessarily have a name for it, just because we were seeing these so much. And he described it. He described it just as a black or dark gray cube, and that cube was inside of a clear translucent sphere. And essentially the apex or the corners of that cube, best he could tell, were touching that inside of that sphere.
The guy who finally saw this object with his own two eyes described it as being a black or dark gray cube that was inside of some type of translucent sphere. Now, it is interesting that that pilot described it looking like that because that's not the first time that there have been reports of a UFO that fit that exact description. In June of 2015, 2 residents of El Paso, Texas, reported seeing a massive black cube emerging from swirling clouds during a windy day. One witness described a magnetic humming sound emanating from the object and captured photographs of the phenomenon. However, many people think that the images might be computer generated. Also in 2022, multiple witnesses across Missouri, including areas like Springfield, Raytown, and Kansas City, reported seeing cube-shaped UFOs with lights. And there was even a sighting in Colorado Springs where a woman recorded a cube-shaped object hovering in the sky. But why a cube? Well, first, a cube-like aircraft could be super practical for the aliens. A cube provides a lot of usable space inside with minimal structural complexity. It could be made of repeating modular units, easy for repairs, upgrades, or, adapting to different missions. If they have multiple ships or components, cube shapes stack neatly like intergalactic Legos. The cube could also have tech or, physics that is just simply beyond what we understand. Gravity manipulation or inertial dampening could make the ship immune to the laws that make our ship streamlined. A cube could house a strange propulsion system or warp engine that needs a specific geometry, like aligning with spatial dimensions or quantum fields. Now, these have been 5 of the scariest alien stories ever told on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. As always, let me know if you guys would like to see a part 2, and be sure to subscribe with those post notifications on. And without further ado, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.